Coming down into the corner. Fed in now behind the net. And around to Orlov, who will come down off the left-hand side, go low to high. Slavin at the right point. A shot, they score, and it's over. A puck that tipped, it looked like right in front of Thompson. And the Carolina Hurricanes have taken game one of this best-of-7 second-round matchup. The shot from the right point gets through, and Carolina wins it 2-1.
Yeah, Jakob Slavin, exactly 3 minutes and 6 seconds into overtime. John Walton on the call last night on Caps Radio. That one just kind of slipped under Logan Thompson, who had been the Caps savior all night long. 2-1 Carolina in overtime. 1-0 now Carolina in the series with Game 2 tomorrow night at Capital One. Good morning. Big trade in the NFL. We'll talk about that on the show coming up. Why Trey Amos may have slid a bit in the NFL draft on the show today. And you'll hear Adam Peters on the show today talk about the draft pick that excited everybody in the building as much as any other. And he also talked about the specific moment when he knew that Washington would be taking Jaden Daniels with the number 2 overall pick in last year's draft. Good morning, everybody. Emily Kaplan, who is terrific on the ABC ESPN broadcast of NHL hockey games. Last night, Sean McDonough, Ray Ferraro, and Emily Kaplan in Capital One calling Caps and Canes game 1. No local broadcasts anymore, so we miss out on Joe B. Locker, etc. But Emily Kaplan will jump on with us in about 15 minutes to talk about last night's game from her view, ice level. Jeff Zilgett, who covers the NBA for USA Today, will be with us at noon. And Chris Russell, who's the biggest hockey fan, I think, at the station, he will jump on towards the end of the show to talk Caps and Carolina as well. So I'm going to start this show with this. You know, most of you know this. Hockey, not really my thing at all. I love the playoffs. I really do. I love the intensity and the drama of NHL playoff hockey, especially these games that go to an extra period, go to overtime. And I enjoy trying to understand the game a little bit more each year. And truly, for me, it can only happen this time of year when I'm truly paying attention and am really immersed in it. But I don't know much about hockey. Most of you don't either. Truth is, we don't know as much as we think we know about some of the other sports either, like football in particular. But that doesn't stop us from talking about it as if we have some level of expertise. With that said, hockey, not something I understand much, but I do have the ability, I think, like many of you do, to watch a sporting event and recognize a mismatch when you see it. Last night's final score, 2-1 Carolina in overtime, could not have been more misleading. During the course of the game, I texted multiple friends of mine who are, hockey guys. One of them was at the game. One of them was not. And I just said, is this as one-sided as it appears to be? Or am I missing something? And the reaction was, Caps are getting their ass kicked. One friend of mine did say, here it is, quote, doesn't matter if your goalie is stoning everything coming his way, close quote. And yeah, Logan Thompson was the star last night in the game and almost pulled off, I would say, a stunner. Yet I think it happens in hockey all the time, where you get a team that is clearly the better team overall, but they lose or they're in overtime, because the goalie can stop everything that comes his way and keep a team in a game single-handedly. Some of the statistics from this game are unbelievable. How about these numbers? Hold on. Had them in front of me. So the Caps, in terms of shots on goal, 33-14. Now, we've seen, disparities like that before. I don't know how often you see shot attempts at 94-34. Carolina had 60 more shot attempts than the Caps did in the game. I saw this stat at the end of the game that the Caps had more block shots than Carolina did? And I'm like, well, yeah, no duh. I mean, when you have 60 more shots than the opponent is going to have more block shots than you.
Not only that, Kevin, but they also had more block shots than shot attempts.
The Caps did.
Yes.
I mean, they out-hit the Caps 44-31. And then I saw this stat because I kept saying to myself watching the game and then texting with friends because I was watching the game by myself last night. I was like, I mean, when does the puck get out of the zone that Carolina can score in? Like, I don't understand how a team can dominate. You know, they call it tilting the ice. The ice was tilted completely, 180 degrees. Would that be it? Yeah, I think it would be.
Yeah.
I mean, they doubled the offensive zone ice time than the Caps, 33-28 to 16-51. I actually thought it would have been much worse than that. I don't know anything about this sport, but I'm a sports fan like many of you. And that was a one-sided ass kicking. You know, the other thing that struck me as a comparison to the Montreal series, you know, one thing, and I talked about this with Max, I talked about it with Joe and others during the first series, it was very, very clear that the Caps were a bigger, stronger, more physical team. Last night, Carolina was as big, they were as physical, and by the way, just more skilled. I can't believe how the Caps just never seemed to be able to put passes together. They were never on sticks as they were trying to get out of their own zone. And meantime, Carolina, every pass is right on the stick of a skater. They were just so much better. And yet, it's 1-0 midway through the third period. That's hockey for you, man. Random as you know what. It is so random. The goal was a great goal by Dylan Strome. Don't get me wrong. I'm sorry, Alexi Protas. It was a great goal. All right. That was a big-time goal, and they needed it. And you could tell that Carolina, despite completely dominating the game, they were getting to that point where they were starting to feel like, oh, my God, we can't lose this game. And the one thing that I would say in watching the game, and I think I did see a stat on this that backed me up, is that the really good chances weren't necessarily there. There was a volume of shot attempts, 94-34, which, Max, you'd have to tell me right now, how unusual is that disparity?
Very. It, like, you could immediately see it right out of the gate. Like, I was at the game. Carolina was buzzing from the jump. The only time the Caps really looked good was coming out to start the second period. And then from the rest of the way, the Canes just had their foot on the gas, like, the entire time. They just looked like the better team, the more well-polished team. Their passes were crisp. They were just flying all over the ice. The only thing the Caps really tried to get going for them was the physical game. Ovi was throwing the body around.
Ovi, the one stretch when Ovi had the 2 hits, that sequence was like, okay, maybe they can turn it around with Ovi sparking them. But no.
But yeah.
Like, their power, they had 2 power plays in the game.
Yes.
I mean, you talk about impotent. There was no chance. In meantime, Carolina, it was almost impossible to, clear the puck against their power play. But what I was in the midst of saying was, I did see a stat, and I can't find it right now. But the one thing that I observed in watching the game is that they didn't have a lot of, like, obvious great chances.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Logan Thompson was great, but it wasn't like he was making one miraculous save after another.
Yeah.
A lot of them were right on his glove. By the way, real quickly, was that overtime goal that he gave up a bad goal?
It was on the other end, so I couldn't really see it. But, like, looking at the replay,
you've seen it on replay, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It went
looking at the
under
replay, it didn't
his
look,
pads.
It didn't look that bad. I mean, like, things are just going to slip through sometimes. And when you're fighting for your life and putting the team on your back the way that Logan Thompson has, especially last night, even if it's, like, kind of a bad goal, you're still going to get a pass in my book, especially for how well you played throughout the entirety of the game. It's just one's going to get through eventually, especially when they're peppering you as hard as Carolina was.
Yeah. Look, these things are their own entities a lot of the time, these games. I was trying to come up with like the football analogy to last night. It's actually not that hard. It's like the game in which you're watching and one team is rolling up, 450 yards and they're 8 for 12 on third down. And for some reason, when they get into the red zone, there's a tip ball that gets picked off. There's a couple of missed field goals. And all of a sudden, like this game that's been dominated by one team, it's like 13-13 and it's going to overtime. And you're like, oh my God, how did that happen? But then, they drive it down the field. They score a touchdown in overtime. They win the game, but it should never have been that close. That was last night. I mean, last night was the equivalent of like a 300-yard advantage, an 8 out of 13 first down to 1 out of 10 on third down for the other team, a time of possession advantage of 37-23. Like it was just an absolute one-sided beatdown, but miraculously, and it happens a lot more in hockey, than it does in football or basketball. The team that was getting its absolute ass handed to them still had a chance to win the game. Now, if you're asking me to give you the adjustments, I can't. I read Spencer Carberry's. I read the press conference notes, and he said, we'll have to talk about things that have to change for game 2. There's a lot of X's and O's. There's a lot of physicality stuff. There's a lot of puck battle stuff. We'll narrow it down because you can obviously go down about 20 different avenues from tonight. We'll narrow it down and give them a concrete plan of what needs to improve and how it needs to look, and then we'll get to work on it. So I can't sit here and tell you that this is going to be an indication of what the rest of the series will be, because I know that things change and each one of these games can be their own entities. But last night's game as a standalone was jarring. Like, I can't remember being so from an observation standpoint, it be so obvious that one team just was so much better than the other team. Yeah. I mean, the puck never, ever seemed to get into the offensive end for the Caps consistently enough for them to generate scoring chances. And I didn't see I was after the second period where I think they put up a stat on the shot attempts. I'm like, yeah, that kind of says it all. Now, someone would have to explain to me, is volume of shot attempts a style of play that pays off more often than not if the shot attempts aren't high quality chances consistently? And by the way, with all of those shot attempts, do you leave yourself vulnerable to sort of breakouts? Because Ryan Leonard had a chance with a breakaway one-on-one to give them the lead, and he couldn't get it done. So I'd ask you, Max, you're a hockey guy. When you have the ice tilted as much as Carolina did last night, and you're just peppering shots near the goal, shot attempts, not all of the shots on goal, although I think they hit the post
twice.
I think it was 4 times.
Yeah, it was twice in the third. I'm sorry. And
yeah, I think it was 4 or 5 times for the game.
It was a lot. It was far too many.
Do you leave yourself with that aggressive style more vulnerable to giving up something easy, 2-on-1, 3-on-2, 1-on-0 on the other end?
I think it depends on what you're telling your defensemen, because if your defensemen are sitting back and like ready to backskate, ready to play defense and face that forecheck, like I think that if your forwards are pressing and it's good to get as many shot attempts on goal as you can, because if no matter how many, the more shots, the more likely it is to go in. Yeah,
I mean 94 shot attempts, but 33 shots on goal.
Yeah,
and high quality chances were less than that. I was looking for that number,
and a lot of times during the game, like the Caps were doing a pretty good job as good as they could. That's why it was one zippy for like a good portion of the game. The Caps were just getting in front of pucks, playing square, getting down, blocking shots. Like I think Matt Roy had 6 blocks, and someone else did too. I can't remember off the top of my head, but like that's a lot of pucks to the body, like throughout the course of a game. It was Brandon Duhaime's who it was. Shot at the fourth line. They played all right.
Well, Tomorrow night can be a completely different thing. We'll see.
He's God.
There was a reason that Carolina was a solid favorite to win the series, and I saw the reason last night. I think many of you did as well. It doesn't guarantee anything. It's hockey, and Logan Thompson could stop everything. He could stop, 45 shots on goal out of 100 attempts in game 2, and the Caps could, get one on the power play and get, a shorthanded goal. Who knows? But it really was obvious watching the game last night why the odds makers made Carolina a solid minus 175 to minus 190 favorite, depending on where you bet it or looked at it. That was what I was looking for last night, and you got it last night. We had John Walton on the show yesterday, and he said if shot attempts, are like at 15 after the first period, that's a problem. And they were up there, and yet the Caps had the lead. Emily Kaplan was there last night. She'll join us next. Carolina with a 1-0 series lead after dominating game one, but needing overtime to get it done. Game two tomorrow night back at Capital One. Last night on the call for ESPN was the terrific Sean McDonough with Ray Ferraro and Emily Kaplan, who is the on-ice interviewer and observer. She does a phenomenal job. I'm a big fan. Emily joins us right now. You can follow Emily on X, on Twitter, at Emily M. Kaplan. So, admittedly, I don't know a lot about hockey until this time of year, Emily, when I watch it a lot, and I love playoff hockey. Was it as one-sided last night as it appeared to have been from the ice level?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me on, Kevin, and it's so great to connect. Appreciate the kind words.
Yep.
Yes. Bottom line, yes, it was. I've been around this Capitals team a lot, cover them a lot in the regular season. I was there pretty much the last 2 weeks of the regular season as Obi was closing down on the record, and through their whole first-round series as well. And this is a really well-coached team. It's just a great team with an identity and a lot of guys that play hard for a coach that always seems to have the right adjustments. And last night was the first night I can remember them just looking disjointed, like they just didn't have it. And okay, like maybe there's this rust, there's a long layoff, the other team is dealing with it too, but the fact that it didn't get better over the game was just puzzling to me. Spencer Carberry has gone out of his way to compliment the Montreal Canadiens, their first round opponent, of how valiant they were. But the truth is, and the coaches were saying this to me in the middle of the game, and I think this is what they're going to be talking about heading into game two. The Carolina Hurricanes are just a different beast. They're seasoned. They're ready for the playoffs. They apply a ton of pressure, and the Caps just need to make sure they're on their A game. And I think they'll make their adjustments, but it definitely was as lopsided as it looked in game one.
So the shot attempts, 94-34. I'm just curious, is that like unprecedented territory in terms of one-sidedness on a shot attempt stat line?
It would be a bigger deal if the team they were playing wasn't the Carolina Hurricanes, because this is their MO. Sometimes they get a bit of slack for it in the hockey community because it's just shots all the time. And Spencer Carberry is like, we have a very similar system, but the biggest difference with the Capitals is shot selection over shot quantity. And so I think that this is often what you see with the Carolina Hurricanes. Critics of them will say, well, it kind of disguises. Maybe they're not as dominant as they look. It's just the way they play. At the same time, this is who they are. It's their identity. I also find them to be very well coached by Brendan Morth. They're very consistent. So I think that's the only reason I wouldn't raise a huge alarm, especially when we're talking about shot attempts.
So that's something they're known for. I'm curious, is that an analytics thing? Is that an analytics-driven number that Carolina's bought into?
Well, their general manager, Eric Tulsky, definitely comes from an analytics background. If you don't know about him, I would suggest you Google him. He has a fascinating way that he got into the hockey world. He's got a bunch of patents. He's a PhD. He's far smarter than any of us. But their coach, Rod Brind'Amour, is a guy that played in this league for a very long time and is all about effort. And he's known for his workout habits and being Rod the Bod. And I think his system, yes, he's bought into a bit of the analytics, and I think that's definitely analytics based, but his philosophy is all about work and effort. And it's, again, it's very aggressive style. They're pressing you all the time. They're, getting shot attempts all the time. And so I think it's a blend of both that creates the Carolina Hurricanes identity.
We're talking to Emily Kaplan from ESPN. So when you get a result like last night, and it's not totally unusual when one team dominates, but this sport is built for a goaltender to keep you in the game and for the results sometimes to go the opposite way of the team that's dominated. How good was Logan Thompson last night, and how good has he been in the postseason so far?
Yeah, he's been spectacular. I just think Logan Thompson and really Charlie Lindgren, kind of gets lost in this. He fell off a little bit at the end of the regular season, but they were so spectacular for the Caps all season long. Logan rose to a different level, though, to really take the starter's position. And he's just one of those guys that had an interesting path to get to the NHL. Wasn't necessarily a blue chip prospect, but always worked his butt off. And a really fascinating guy to talk to all the time. And I think there was a lot of questions, right? Because he missed a bit at the end of the regular season. They were saying it's upper body injury. I do believe it was a head injury. And then they name him as the game one starter coming in cold. And he was just fantastic in that game one, showed no signs of rust. And I think that they're really lucky that they have something special in Logan Thompson, a starter that they can ride out, hopefully through a long playoff run. And if they have to turn to Charlie Lindgren, I think they feel very confident in him too.
So in sports, in these series, sometimes these games are kind of one game entities and there's no carryover. It would be hard not to see some carryover after watching last night. But what do you think Spencer Carberry, the adjustments are? What are the adjustments the Caps have to make to ensure that the ice isn't tilted as much as it was last night?
Yeah, I mean, the word that they were using last night was hesitation. I think maybe it's just even a mindset of not letting the Canes dictate the play and saying, guys, like, we have a system too. And I think that the players, just for whatever reason, were overwhelmed. You saw an adjustment mid-game yesterday that I think you'll see continue for game two, which is Alexei Protas, who's been one of their best players all season long. He came back from a very serious skate cut injury. He was starting on the fourth line, but as the game progressed, you saw him get some looks in that top six and back on Ovi's line. And I'd expect him to start on, with Strome and Ovi in game two. And then I'm trying to think of what other adjustments they're going to make. I honestly feel like it's just kind of like a mindset thing where like they came into this and maybe just taking things a little for granted, feeling good about the way things went with Montreal. And I think more so just like understanding that this is going to be a battle. And I know that these guys will, because it's just what they've done all season long. They've exceeded expectations. Every time everyone thinks they're going to fall off, they always find another level. But I think those are some of the things that you're going to see. Just them also just trying to move the puck a bit quicker and up the ice. I think that was one thing that they just, again, the hesitation, like it didn't look fresh. It didn't look crisp.
So what's it been like? You've been a part of covering a lot of these games this year because of the OV chasing down of Gretzky. What's it been like to be a part of that and to witness it up close?
Yeah, it's super special, and it's a privilege, something I don't take for granted. I really feel privileged just to get a glimpse into this team and why Ovechkin is so beloved in this league and what makes him, just one of the enduring characters and, hockey players of our time. I think he's a way better captain than people realize, the way that he leads by example. He sets the tone. He's also really goofy and he's funny, and, he's always keeping it light. It's a really special group of guys. I think they all realize that in preseason. They brought in a bunch of new players, all in the early, mid-20s age, to try to make sure that they could, retool on the fly. And they all just seem to enjoy each other. So it's one of the more fun teams that I've been able to be around. And to be there as part of history is something that, I'll remember for the rest of my career, because Wayne Gretzky's record is something people in hockey said was unattainable. No one ever thought that it would be broken. And for it to be broken by Alex Ovechkin and in the way that he did, I'm still speechless by it.
Do you think, like last night was a bit jarring, I think, after the first round series against Montreal, and it's been a memorable season with the OV chase and the Caps unexpectedly having the season that they had as a team. Do you think they're in trouble in this series?
I don't think they're in trouble in this series because of the way they played in game one. I always thought this was going to be a 6 or 7 game series. I just think, they need to show up with their A game next game, point blank. I mean, if you lose 2 at home, that's when you've got the issue. When you split at home, okay, like that's common in Stanley Cup playoffs where parity is, why we love it. And any team that gets in has a chance. And these are 2 really, really great programs. So I wouldn't raise the alarms right now after game 1 loss, but if you go down 0-2 and you have to head to Raleigh, which is a really difficult place to play, I would be concerned.
ESPN's Emily Kaplan joining us. You just said Carolina is a difficult place to play. You get to be front and center in some incredible sports environments. It's like every night when I flip it, whether it's Dallas or Winnipeg or Edmonton or Toronto in particular, and I know Montreal was off the charts for their 2 home games in the first round series. What is the most electric atmosphere in terms of home ice in the sport?
So I'm in Toronto right now, and this little dirty secret is I don't think it's Toronto at all. I think it's a very corporate crowd to get up for this national anthems, but they're known as kind of a late arriving crowd, especially between period breaks. Like, I wouldn't necessarily pick the Leafs, even though you might assume them, right, because of their long Stanley Cup drought. I think most of the true fans are outside of the plaza, cheering their butts off there. Winnipeg, I haven't had the privilege of going there in these playoffs. I have been there in the past for a whiteout, and that's just something cool. Like, that's just unreal. I didn't get to go to the 2 games in Montreal because Turner had those games. But being there for Four Nations at the Bell Center for those USA-Canada games, and what the Capitals players were telling me, that was the best environment they had ever played in. It's just such a unique hockey market. They're so passionate, and that building, it just, I mean, obviously it's rich with history, but they get up, and the fact that it was on a Friday night, I think that city was rocked upside down. I'd have to pick Montreal for number one.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine who went to Game 3, and he's a hockey fan. He says of all the sporting events he's ever been to, he's never been in a more electric, raucous environment, pregame in particular, than Montreal for that night. So I think a lot of people probably feel the same way. So you have this thing where at the end, your interviews, by the way, are phenomenal. I mean, you're so your brevity is incredible, but they're just great questions, and you're direct and to the point. It seems like the reaction to you is just really really great from players and coaches. But you do this thing where you say thank you at the end of interviews in the player or coach's native language. How many native language thank yous have you had to learn, or did you know a lot of them already?
Just being around the sport, it's such a multicultural sport. I mean, it's just a diverse sport in terms of, the country. So Finnish, Swedish, Russian, Czech I always mispronounce. My boyfriend gets on me all the time for it, and the guys never correct me. I'm always on David Pasternak, like, come on, like, let me get it right. But French, and, there's a couple other ones. I think for me, it's just a little sign of respect, and I think it's just a reminder to the viewer at home that what these guys are doing is really difficult when English is your second language and you're doing a live interview on television. And that's uncomfortable, and it's pretty brave and courageous. And so I think sometimes viewers forget that. And it's just like a gentle reminder of like, hey, let's just like remember where this guy came from. Remember, how hard he's working. And I think the players appreciate it too, because that's a part of their story that they're really proud of.
Is there one you haven't done yet? Is there a thank you haven't done yet?
Good question. I think, you know what? I felt bad yesterday. Alexei Protas, he's Belarusian, and I'm pretty sure you say thank you in Belarusian differently than you do in Russian. I just knew that he did speak Russian, so I went with my spasiba, and I know that works, but I got to practice that one too.
You do a great job. I know you got to rush off to the Toronto skate this morning. Good luck tonight. You'll be back in D.C. tomorrow night, right?
Oh, she sure will be. It's a
sure
fun
will
stretch.
be.
Yeah.
Thanks, Emily.
I guess the weekend's off, though. Couch my week this weekend. I look forward to that.
Oh, you get the weekend off. How does that work? There are games.
Yeah, it's the weird window of scheduling. I think, with the two different NBA and NHL playoffs, ESPN and Turner. So Turner gets all the games Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And you know what? I really look forward to watching their coverage.
Our friend Tarek El-Bashir actually is on the ice for some of those games for TNT.
No, we love Tarek. He does a great job.
Yeah, he does a great job. Keep up the good work. Really enjoy it. Thanks, Emily, for your time.
Appreciate you, Kevin.
Emily Kaplan, everybody from ESPN, ABC. Caps and Canes tomorrow night, game 2. Again, no local. Once we get to the second round, there's no monumental involved anymore. So no more Joe B, no more Locker, no more, the boys, Alan May, Koken especially, back in the studio or on the ice. It's all national from now on. I'll tell you, Sean McDonough is excellent. I think this guy, Ray Ferraro, you hockey fans would know more than I would about him, but I think he's good. Emily's phenomenal. That is how you do that job. Every kind of interview is different. Some are more conversational. Some are, just direct and to the point, and she has that job where it's direct and to the point, and she gets it right almost every night. We thank her because she was busy flying to Toronto and then getting to their skate this morning before their game 2 tonight against Florida, where they have a 1-0 series lead. That was interesting. Toronto, more of a corporate crowd. Toronto, for the Maple Leafs, they have not won the cup since '67. This was one of the dominant NHL teams. I didn't know this until very recently. One of the more dominant NHL teams in the 60s. They had a run of like 4 Stanley Cups in 6 years, and they haven't won one or been back to one since 1967. All right, that is a drought, boys and girls, all right? That is 33 plus 25, 58 years since they've played in a Stanley Cup final, let alone won one. And their fans have been starved for it over the years. But that was interesting to hear her say that it's kind of a corporate crowd and late arriving. And you get that with sort of the wine and cheese corporate crowd situations in sports. Now, what they do, Max, in all of these Canadian places, more so than maybe the U.S. places, although maybe I'm wrong about this, but they have these plazas outside of the arenas.
Yeah.
Where the Toronto situation, the Winnipeg situation the other night, watching that, it's thousands of fans, like the Caps did during their Stanley Cup, when they got to the Eastern Conference Finals anyway, and into the Stanley Cup. But the Montreal crowd apparently is off.
They're bananas.
The chain.
They're crazy. They're so unbelievably loud, according to reports, that like it's ear piercing almost.
Yeah. Well, it would make sense. Toronto is obviously a more cosmopolitan city than any other in Canada, with probably the exception of Vancouver. I'm assuming those would be the top two kind of, cosmopolitan, diverse, etc. cities in Canada, and probably in terms of affluence, right up there with Vancouver as well. I'm guessing. I could be wrong. For all I know, Winnipeg is a very upper crust city. I don't think it is.
No,
I think it's more of a working class city.
They are. The whiteout.
Yeah.
They love the shirt. They are a huge hockey town. Like Winnipeg it's incredible.
They love their hockey, and there are so many Canadian teams. You've got Winnipeg, you've got Edmonton, you've got Toronto still around. And it's been, correct me if I'm wrong, since Montreal's last Stanley Cup that a Canadian team's won one.
I believe that's
been a long time.
Yeah, it's been it. I don't think they've won in the 2020 in this millennium.
In this century, yeah. So we got to go back to the 90s for Montreal.
Something like that, yeah.
Okay. All right. If you want to weigh in, 301-230-0980. We usually don't do hockey call segments on this show. They're a little bit dicey, but during the playoffs, we can do it. 301-230-0980. Did you see last night's game as worrisome? They lost 2-1 in overtime. If you just tuned in for the overtime and you saw the final score, wow, hell of a game. It was a hell of a game. It was exciting, but it was a one-sided, dominated game by Carolina. Reason to be concerned or not? 301-230-0980. It's the Kevin Sheehan Show on the Team 980, theteam980.com. We are free and live on the Odyssey app.
All right, the arms race in the NFC Beast is heating up as the Cowboys traded for George Pickens and a 6th-round pick they sent over to Pittsburgh for a 2026 third and a 2027 6th. Gabe Davis has been released by the Jaguars after he signed a 3-year deal prior to the 2024 season. He had 20 receptions for 239 yards and 2 touchdowns in 10 games played in 2024. Some name news? No, not where you think we're going. The Utah Hockey Club has officially chosen a name. They will now be known as the Utah Mammoth, a permanent identity for the NHL franchise after a 13-month process that included 850,000 ballots cast by fans in multiple rounds of voting. The Nats split their doubleheader with the Cleveland Guardians. In Game 1, they win 10-9. Jorge Lopez gets credited with the win, and Kyle Finnegan gets the save. Game 2, they lose 9-1. Brad Lord had 6 innings pitched, 3 hits, 3 earned runs, and 4 strikeouts. The Caps unfortunately dropped to the Carolina Hurricanes 2-1 in overtime. Jacob Slavin with the overtime winner. The Canes just outplayed the Caps in spite of the scoreboard, and Logan Thompson played an incredible game, might I add. Game 2 is tomorrow at 6:45 on 106.7 The Fan. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, and hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1, and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC Sports. And that's what's trending.
Are you concerned about this series after the Caps were completely dominated in game one, even though the final score didn't reflect it? 301-230-0980. Come on, Caps fans. Chance for you to weigh in on the phone lines. Come on, Sheehan. You going to take some Caps calls in November and December? We're doing it now during the midst of the playoffs. 301-230-0980. How concerned, how worried are you after what you witnessed last night in game one? Phone lines are open. Before we get to those, let's do a quick what do you got? Yes, so there was a trade in the NFL. The Cowboys have traded for Steelers wide receiver George Pickens. He'll line up opposite CeeDee Lamb in the Cowboys offense. They traded a third rounder in next year's draft. They also sent a 2027 fifth round pick and got a 2027 sixth round pick back from the Steelers. So on day 3 of the 2027 draft, when we're hanging out down on the mall on a beautiful spring day, the Cowboys will have the Steelers' sixth round pick, but the Steelers will have the Cowboys' fifth round pick. But this is an interesting trade. A couple of things that we learned from this. The Cowboys apparently would have selected McMillan, the wide receiver from Arizona, had he fallen to 12th. That was their target in the draft. They wanted Tet McMillan, the wide receiver from Arizona, to team up with CeeDee Lamb. He went to Carolina at number 8 overall. Tyler Booker was there, and the Cowboys ended up taking the best guard in the 2025 NFL draft at number 12 overall. I wonder a couple of things about this. Number one is, the Steelers, they don't typically get these things wrong. They know their people. George Pickens has been a bit of a problem. Let's be honest here. And this may work in Dallas for a while until Pickens isn't getting the ball, and then all hell will break loose, because once they start to feed him the ball, then CeeDee Lamb may have a problem with it. Like there's some high level dysfunction possibility with this deal. Remember, the Steelers moved on from Antonio Brown. Remember when they absolutely fleeced the Bears in the Chase Claypool trade? They got a third rounder for the Notre Dame kid who clearly couldn't play and was a problem, and they had moved on from him quickly after drafting him in the second round. So when it comes to this kind of stuff, I think the Steelers actually know what they're doing. Remember, they traded for DK Metcalf, so they had him. But the combination of Metcalf and Pickens would have been, an interesting combination for a team with a quarterback, but they don't have one right now. So on one hand, it's like Steelers typically know what they're doing in these situations. The Cowboys typically do not. There's high volatility possibility in Dallas with Pickens on that roster. And then there is this. Could Aaron Rodgers be pulling the strings behind the scenes on something like this? Maybe one of the reasons he's waited, he looks at the Pittsburgh situation, goes, I don't want to have that guy on my team. I don't want to throw to Pickens no matter how talented he is. Trade for DK Metcalf, get rid of Pickens. Let's go. They drafted Caleb Johnson. They still have Jalen Warren. They've got Freiermuth. They've got Metcalf. Other receivers on their roster include Robert Woods from Houston, I think. And, of course, they've got a good defense. But, man, the Pittsburgh roster right now without a quarterback, this looks to be like the worst Pittsburgh team on paper, unless they are to add a quarterback they can still play. I would imagine that if it's not Rodgers, they may make a run at Cousins. I don't think they go into the season with Mason Rudolph unless they're legitimately waiting on next year's draft and trying to tank the season to a certain degree to have a choice at better quarterbacks next year. Real quickly, one of the quarterbacks at the top of the mock drafts in 2026 is Cade Klubnik from Clemson. I don't get that at all. I've watched this dude now for 2 straight years. He stinks. I don't get that one at all. But there's a lot of time between now and next year's draft. So the Cowboys add Pickens. So now, remember, the Cowboys have a lot of new, talent on their roster. They added in their backfield Javonte Williams, Miles Sanders. They drafted Jaden Blue from Texas. They've now added George Pickens to CD Lamb. Defensively, remember, they brought Dante Fowler back. They brought in Kenneth Murray from Tennessee, the linebacker. There's a lot going on in Dallas. That roster, when healthy, if they've got Bland and Hooker and Diggs and Parsons and, that dude Overshone, who really played well before he got hurt last year, they're okay on defense. Offensively, will Pickens make a difference? Will Javonte Williams or Jaden Blue be a running back, or Sanders be a running back that they haven't had in a few years? We'll see. The key, obviously, for them is Dak can't go down. Like, they don't have a backup anymore. Actually, they do. They traded for Joe Milton in New England. That's the backup quarterback they have right now. After years of having Cooper Rush, backing up Dak Prescott and playing pretty well. Cooper Rush is somewhere else. I can't even remember where Cooper Rush is. So there you go. Big NFL news this morning. The Cowboys, Jarrett promised a trade of substance, I think is what he said before the draft. And you just got, somewhat of a trade of substance. The big question left in the NFL right now, or there are three of them: Trey Hendrickson, Jalen Ramsey, and the quarterback in Pittsburgh. Who is it? I don't think I'm missing anything in terms of the three other big stories. There are still some free agents out there. We've talked about some of them, Zadarius Smith, others, J.K. Dobbins, and Nick Chubb. But in terms of the three biggest outstanding NFL storylines after the schedule comes out next week is who's going to play quarterback in Pittsburgh? Will Trey Hendrickson re-sign or be traded? And Jalen Ramsey, where will he be traded to and for what? All right, 301-230-0980. We got a couple of callers on hold. Are you concerned about the Caps after what you witnessed last night? I said this at the beginning of the show. I'm not a hockey expert by far. We're not expert in anything that we talk about, but we have a much better handle on other things. I do anyway. But last night, any sports fan could spot a blowout that should have been reflected on the scoreboard. The Caps got outshot 94-34 in shot attempts, 33-14 shots on goal, out-hit, outplayed, out-timed in the zones, in the offensive zone, 2-1. It was an ice-tilting, one-sided beatdown that was not reflected in the final score, but the team that won the game clearly deserved to win the game. Are you concerned about the Caps after game one? Are you worried that this series could get away from them? Let's start with Ryland in OKC. We talk to Ryland sometimes during football season. Ryland, go ahead.
Kev, hope you're doing well, buddy.
Yeah, good to hear your voice, Ryland.
I
know you're Canadian too. Let's get that out in front. So you've got a little bit more expertise in this area.
I've played a few games in my career, for sure. I would say I wouldn't be too concerned just because the fact of the Ovechkin factor and just the team of destiny along with that Russian gas. I would say that although you guys are saying a lot of good things about Thompson, I think he's a little bit shaky. To me, that overtime winner last night was soft. I mean,
yeah,
I've played.
I thought that might have been a soft goal that he let up. I asked Max that earlier. That seemed like one that is stoppable.
Oh, you have to make that save in overtime. I mean, if that was in regulation, that wouldn't be the end of the world. But in overtime, you got to get your pad down there. You can't let that one squeak through. I would just say the biggest game of the year, of course, is tomorrow night. You can't go back down to Raleigh down 2-0. Not a chance you'll come back from that hole. But I think they just need to capitalize on their power play and start playing more downhill. I don't think shot attempts are necessarily a good thing, but in the sense of Carolina, they're just firing everything on Logan Thompson, honestly, because I think he's a little bit shaken. I think they know that. So I wouldn't be surprised if they get 85 shot attempts tomorrow, but for your guys' sake and for the capital and the district, I hope the Ovechkin can score a couple goals tomorrow night and go back to Raleigh 1-1 and steal one there and get back home ice. So Good talking to you, Kev. Hope you're doing well. Oklahoma City's
Rylan,
buzzing right now.
it's an interesting take, and I appreciate it as always, because I would not have gone with Logan Thompson looks shaky. I would have gone with and did go with the only reason they had a chance in the game last night was Logan Thompson. But that's interesting.
Yeah, for sure, right?
Yeah.
And I think, I think he just looks shaky to me. Like even in the World Cup there, where he didn't make Team Canada, everybody was kind of looking at the roster like, how is he not on this team? Well, watching last night, I like that overtime winner says a lot and speaks volumes, because the best goalies make the biggest saves when it matters most, and those ones just can't go through, especially if we're going to win the cup. So hopefully they can figure it out tomorrow, and he keeps putting that brick wall down so they have a chance. But root for you boys, and hope you're doing well, Kev. Good talking to you, and let's go Skins,
Thanks,
guys.
Rylan. Appreciate the call. Joe, go ahead.
Hey, Kevin, what's going on?
What's up, Joe?
50-50 on this. I would not panic after last night because it's one game. However, Kevin, 93 shot attempts, what was it, 31 shot attempts for us? That is alarming. And the fact that it was only a 2-1 overtime loss for us, I mean, Kevin, the other thing about last night is that if Leonard scores, he had that breakaway, and I think he mix-handled the puck. If he scores there, are we talking about a victory or a loss in this situation? I don't know, but Kevin, if we go down 2-0 tomorrow night, going back down to Carolina, I mean, who knows what happens? The playoffs, anything's possible. But I mean, the way we got outshot last night, Ovechkin hopefully can step up. I mean, Logan Thompson, I mean, you got to give him credit. He's done everything he can for us in this postseason. I mean, last night he handled the puck in overtime that he doesn't usually saves. I mean, he's definitely wants someone back, but we'll see. But I'm not panicking at it yet. But if we go down 2-0 tomorrow night and we get outplayed like that again, it's definitely time to panic. For sure. So take care, Kevin.
Yeah, I would imagine being down 2-0. I mean, look, these hockey games are weird, and random stuff happens. And if you're down 2-0, you just have to get one of them. And then, you get game 5, and then the pressure is on Carolina to end it in game 6. It would seem, though, that this thing would be, if it looks like it did last night, tomorrow night, and instead of losing 2-1 in overtime, they lose by a score that's more reflective of the play, something like 6-1, because that's what it felt like last night. Maybe not 6-1 because the quality of chances that they got, weren't consistently high quality chances, but let's just say a 4-0 game or a 4-1 game, it would feel like it would be over going back to Raleigh. That's for sure. But if the Caps play much better tomorrow night, but still lose 3-2 in overtime, you'll feel a little bit better about the possibilities going back to Carolina. We had Emily Kaplan on. She was great talking about some of the adjustments that Spencer Carberry is an excellent X's and O's coach, which he is known for being. So we'll see what happens. I think the thing that will, for me, in watching tomorrow night's game, okay, for a hockey novice, what will be obvious to me is Carolina spending basically the entire night in their offensive zone. If it's more split, I won't probably be able to identify what the Caps did to even up, sort of offensive zone ice time. But that to me seems like an absolute requirement for tomorrow night. You can't score from, behind your goaltender's net. And that's essentially where they were in their defensive posture all night long. That just doesn't seem like a great place to score from. So I don't know, maybe there's a strategy of counterpunching and taking those opportunities on less than high quality chances, but a lot of shot volume to turn it into a couple of 2-on-1s, 3-on-2s, or a Ryan Leonard situation and win that way. Maybe. I think it's interesting to kind of watch this sport this time of year. And I'm interested because people have told me how good Spencer Carberry is and kind of, figuring things out. I'm really interested to see what it looks like tomorrow night, because last night was a massacre that was not reflected on the scoreboard. All right. Trey Amos, Washington's second-round pick. Why did he fall to the end of the second round? There's some reporting out there that may indicate the reason. I'll share that with you next. We'll talk some NBA at noon with Jeff Zilgett from USA Today. A couple more crazy games last night in the NBA playoffs. I mean, every night here for the last 4 or 5 days and nights have been incredibly thrilling in terms of the finishes. Last night, you had an incredible comeback in the final 45 seconds by Indiana to take a 2-0 lead in Cleveland. And then Steph Curry got injured, and it may be serious. And Golden State still beat Minnesota in game 1 last night. The home team in this second round of the NBA playoffs has yet to win a game in 5 chances. That is unprecedented, unheard of, never happened prior to this year. Typically in the NBA, unlike in hockey, the best team wins 4 out of 7. We'll see what happens in this round. But Steph getting injured last night was a big blow. Adam Peters went on Pat McAfee yesterday. Had a lot to say about a lot of interesting topics. We're going to play some of that for you starting in about 10 minutes. So I was just reading, early this morning, just a bunch about, what's left in the NFL. This was before the Pickens trade was announced, and I mentioned Jalen Ramsey and Trey Hendrickson and who's going to be the Steelers quarterback as some of the big stories. And I came across this little nugget from a story on ESPN.com. It was key intelligence on all 32 teams after the 2025 NFL draft. And for Washington, and maybe Keim wrote this, but there's a quote in here from an AFC executive about Trey Amos. Trey Amos, the Ole Miss corner, was projected by most mock drafts. He was projected to go in the first round anywhere from the mid first round to no worse than maybe early second round. Now, again, there was a lot of, mystery around picks 7 through 70 in this draft. There just was. There was a lot of belief from teams, even not just the mock drafters and the analysts, that, there were 60 players after the top 5 or 6 that were interchangeable for all intents and purposes. But anyway, Amos, for the most part, was consistently mocked in the mid first to worst case early second, and instead he fell all the way until Washington's pick in the second round at number 61 overall. So, it was lauded as a pick that was a great value pick. However, this was in the write-up, key intelligence on the draft when it came to Washington. Quote, one aspect that might have hurt his value slightly is that multiple teams discovered a back injury in the pre-draft process. This wasn't a major red flag for some teams, but it was at least a mild concern that, quote, according to one AFC exec, said probably caused him to slide a bit, closed quote. However, people around Amos and the Commanders did not seem overly concerned about it. So I was curious about this. You don't see much written about a back injury. Now, what he did have at the combine was he had an ankle injury that knocked him out of most of the combine weekend for corners. So he had an ankle injury there, and he had some hamstring injuries at Ole Miss. Okay. And not necessarily, he had some hamstring issues at Louisiana. This was before he transferred to Bama, and then had some hamstring issues at Ole Miss as well. Hamstring issues, we've been around sports as fans long enough to know that the soft tissue injuries are always concerning. Obviously, Marshawn Lattimore, hamstring issues, right? In New Orleans that cost him games, and then cost him games here after he got here. But nobody seemed very concerned about the hamstring injuries or even the ankle injury that caused him to miss most of the testing at the combine. He was able to run at the combine because he ran 4.43. But this intelligence about a back injury that was discovered in the pre-draft process, I think was new news. And perhaps that's the reason that teams passed on him. The corners in the draft, and there were plenty of corners, just like there were other positions, but it was a deep draft. If you take Travis Hunter out of the equation, because corner wide receiver, before Amos went, Jahdae Barron went in the first round at number 20 overall to Denver. Maxwell Hairston, who ran a ridiculous 40 time, I think it was 4.28, sub 4.3 anyway, went at the end of the first round to Buffalo. Will Johnson, remember with the injury, he was the one that was projected to go second or first overall if you didn't consider Travis Hunter to be a corner. But his injury caused him to drop to 15th pick in the second round to Arizona. And then Benjamin Morrison, who had 2 hip surgeries. But I'm telling you, I think Washington liked him as a player going into the draft. Benjamin Morris got picked 8 slots ahead of Washington at number 21 by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then Trey Amos got picked at number 29 at the end of the second round, 61 overall. The corner that went after Amos was the corner that I kind of fell in love with before the draft, Darian Porter from Iowa State. He went early in the third round, which was, we talked about, I talked about the player and I said, I don't know how this guy is a projected day 3 pick or very late, night 2 pick. He's got to go higher than that. He didn't go in the second round. He went in the third round, but he went early in the third round. And then Siobhan Revell Jr. from East Carolina, a player that was mocked in the first round of a lot of drafts, he went to Dallas in the third round as well. After that, there was Quincy Riley from Louisville, who people kind of liked. But I think Amos, in terms of most mocks, probably went before Morrison in most drafts. Instead, there were essentially 4 corners instead of 3 taken before him. But still, end of second round seems like good value. Maybe the back injury was part of the reason. I do think that there were some players that Washington would have been interested in had they fallen. I still think the first round, though, Connerly was their guy after a certain point. Tyler Booker, I had learned sort of before the draft, and that's why I was pumping Tyler Booker if he fell to 29 would likely be the pick. I do think that Ezeraku was somebody that they were very interested in, but remember about Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College, really a specialist, at least to start in his career. He's 248 pounds. The guy was not going to be your first round edge setting run stopper. He was going to be a specialized pass rusher. Dallas drafted him as well. Second round. What pick did he go in the second round? He went at 44 overall, 12th pick in the second round. But other than Booker, I question who else could have been there for Washington at 29 that they would have taken instead of Connerly Jr. I don't think it would have been Pierce. I don't know that. Let me be clear on that. I don't know that. But Pierce Jr., with some of the red flags on things like work ethic, I think would have been a player that would not have fit into what Washington has looked for, in the draft here in the first 2 years. Donovan Jackson would have been interesting had he dropped to 29, the offensive lineman from Ohio State. I am curious as to what they thought of Matthew Golden, the wide receiver that went to Green Bay at 23 overall. I don't think that they would have picked a running back, an Omarion Hampton at 22. In fact, I think if they were going to take a running back early, it would have been Travion Henderson. So, I've heard people say Shamar Stewart, because of the the ridiculous, relative athletic score test. It's just that the production wasn't there. I don't know. Maybe if Shamar Stewart had fallen to 29, it's a possibility. But I would say out of all of the players that were picked before Connerly Jr., that Booker would have been the one that would have been interesting had he fallen to 29. I thought Ezeraku would be, a strong possibility, and he was on the board at 29. But they like Connerly Jr., and we know that now, almost definitively, not just because they told us that, but if you didn't take them at their word, the Howie Roseman sound that we played on the show yesterday with him trying, the Eagles trying to trade up a couple of spots with Washington, and they weren't going to take Connor Lee Jr. They were going to take the linebacker from Bama. They didn't know that they would get him at 32. They traded up. They traded up one spot with Kansas City to 31 to take him. They would have taken him at 29. But Washington at that point knew that there was a chance, had they traded down even just a few spots to 32 where Philadelphia resided in that moment, that a team like the Chiefs could have taken Connor Lee Jr., and that's the player they wanted at that point. That's the player they wanted. The only other kind of interesting scenario, I think, is in the fourth round. They weren't in the third round, but in the fourth round, I know that they like and did like Jalen Lane, and you're going to hear Adam Peters talk about Jalen Lane. There's no doubt they like the player. But I do wonder if David Walker from Central Arkansas or if Kyle Kennard from South Carolina, or maybe Jack Sawyer or Barron Sorrell, but I think the first two that I mentioned more than the latter two, 4 defensive end edges that went in the 7 picks prior to Washington selecting at 26. So you had that one last big edge defensive end move by teams, 4 of them taken in a 5-pick stretch in the fourth round. I do wonder if one of those, to Kennard or Walker had slipped to 20 to Washington at 128 if Washington would have gone edge defensive end there. But they certainly liked Jalen Lane. All right, when we come back, Adam Peters made an appearance yesterday on Pat McAfee's show. There was a lot that he answered. I mean, we got more from him in the Pat McAfee interview than we've typically gotten from Adam Peters. I'll play some of it for you when we come back. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, the team980.com. Don't forget, our show now is on YouTube. You can find us at the Team 980 YouTube page. If you download the Odyssey app, you can just open up the app and type in Team 980 and hit subscribe. But there's a big subscribe button. We'd ask you to hit that. That's good for us. And also hitting the like button is a good thing for us as well. So my show streams 10 to 1, as does Craig Hoffman's show on the Team 980 from 4 to 7. So Adam Peters made an appearance yesterday on the Pat McAfee show on ESPN. McAfee asked him a lot about a lot of different, Washington football Commanders related subjects, including, by the way, the name, which we will get to towards the end of this. But Max cut it all up. I actually didn't watch it. I've read a couple of the quotes. It sounds like he said more than he's typically said in the past. Adam Peters is perfect for the job in terms of not disclosing anything competitively. I think he does a really good job. He comes off as likable and yet not answering anything and yet not arrogant. That's kind of, an overarching theme to the organization today versus yesterday, meaning, under Snyder. This is an organization with some humility. The obvious is it's competence versus incompetence, but the arrogance of the last organization was so off-putting. And from my standpoint, there really isn't anything about the new group that is off-putting. And, sometimes we look for, there's some goofy stuff and some cliches and a lot of idioms about, Mondays and talk to whatever the Monday, what does Quinn call it? I don't mind any of that stuff. That stuff is fine when you're winning. But overall, there's just, I think, a very mature humility to the franchise. For those of us of a certain age, it wasn't just all of the winning in the 80s and 90s. It was the way they won. They won by not telling you that they were going to win. And in fact, downplaying that they were good over and over again. That came really from Gibbs as much as it came from anybody else. But there was an incredible humbleness to their dominance that made them, I think, for reasonably thinking people, that's subjective, I understand that, it just made them even more likable. I mean, there was nothing better than nobody kind of thinking Washington was anything other than, yeah, they're pretty good, they're going to be in the playoffs again, and then just making a deep run and winning, a couple of road playoff games in Chicago. All right, I digress. Back to today. Adam Peters, the team's general manager, talking about the Commanders. Maybe this is not as much humility, but he's talking about the Commanders are now a cornerstone franchise. I haven't heard this one. Max, play it.
That was one of the biggest reasons why I really, really wanted to have this job. And the fact that this is a cornerstone franchise of the NFL, a place where, growing up, this was the team you were watching, hearing about DC in the area and RFK, and then coming and Josh being the owner and him having that vision of bringing this back, being a steward of this DMV area, and just really was appealing to me. So I really, really wanted to get this job. And so far it's been awesome. I mean, being a part of this, being just around everything that's happening, all the excitement, the stadium, the draft now, just really feel really grateful and thankful that I'm here.
Yeah, that's not the answer that I was thinking it would be. It's a great answer. And it's like for people of a certain age, and Adam Peters isn't, didn't grow up really. How old is Adam Peters? Is Adam Peters 50 yet?
No, there's no way. If he is,
he's
then
45.
Okay.
He's 45. So he's just old enough to remember, the Skins being one of the cornerstone franchises of the league. And look, people in the NFL, and I've talked a lot about this, about the desire to see Washington be relevant, is more, it's more than just us. There are NFL lifelong fans that when a team that's been downtrodden as long as we've been, they're excited to see the team back. If Cleveland ever came, Cleveland never has had the success Washington's had, unless you go way back pre-Super Bowl era. But I think it would be cool if Cleveland was a legitimate contender for a period of time, because their fan base has been incredibly loyal to that team over the years, and it's a great fan base. But Peters knows, Josh Harris knows. I thought about recently, what if a guy like Tillman Fertitta, who owns the Rockets. Remember, he was in the running, as was the Canadian guy whose name is escaping me right now. What if you ended up with more of an outsider having bought the team? We would have been thrilled because it would have been sold by Snyder, but it would have been different. I'm not saying that the results would have been any different. Well, I don't know how they would have run the team, but Josh Harris and Mitchell Rales in particular, and Mark Ein as well, they have a true innate historical knowledge and context of what this thing was and what it should be moving forward. And I think that there's some benefit to that. This was Peters talking about last year's draft process and when they knew Jaden Daniels was the guy.
Wow. I think it was just a process of everything from the moment he got in here, the moment we flew him in for interviewing for him after we drafted him, and he wanted to go through the playbook while he was here, and he was doing like dropbacks on the plane back to flying back to LA. And just every step of the way, you could see the humility that he had, the work ethic that he had, just the way he connected with his teammates out. The fields are right over here, like out on the grass, and the way he went about everything. He earned everything he had. And so it was just kind of a step-by-step process, but you could feel it right away what a special person he was.
That was the, part that cinched it. They needed to know that they were drafting a guy that was, good and loved football, which is the saying these days. But, we talked about this last year, and especially after the draft. I think a lot of us were told basically the first time Adam Peters legitimately turned on the tape and watched, he was blown away with what the player was in that final LSU season. The R&D or the analytics people blown away. And by the way, completely destroying some of the, analytics narratives that were out there, things like pressure to sack percentage, et cetera, intermediate throws. They destroyed a lot of that narrative out there by watching the actual, games, play by play rather than looking at just numbers. But that had to be the first part. Like, oh my God, this guy is off the charts in terms of what he has the potential to be as a quarterback in the NFL. And then the next part was bringing him in and praying to God that he was the other part. Loved football, good teammate, great culture guy, etc. Had the work ethic, had the smarts, and he had it all. He was, taking dropbacks on the plane. This was Adam Peters on the Pat McAfee show yesterday, talking about sort of the emphasis in this offseason to bolster the offensive line.
I think in the offseason when we had the opportunity to get Tunsil, which it doesn't come around that often to get a blue chip left tackle, one of the best left tackles in the league. So we felt that was an opportunity that we didn't want to pass up, and for the reasons you're talking about, like we want to protect Jaden, and really he's the cornerstone of our franchise. We want to make sure we're protecting him. And then so we got that done, and then we really wanted Connerly, and that letter was cool because Cliff, he's a tireless worker. It's unbelievable how much he works. And as he's doing draft prep, he's also watching college teams for different plays and different scheme and just different things he can learn from them so he can implement into what we do. And he watched a lot of Oregon. So he said, I watched every single snap of Oregon. And he usually just watches the skill guys, the quarterbacks, receivers, tight ends, running backs. And so he left that note on my desk. He came by to say what's up and just wrote that down, left it on my desk. I was like, all right, well, if Cliff wants this guy, I'm good.
Yeah, a couple of things about that answer, hearing it for the first time. Just a reminder, if you didn't know what he was referring to, Cliff Kingsbury put a note on Adam Peters' desk before the draft saying, Oregon's left tackle, please. He was a big fan of Connerly Jr. There's also the part in there that Cliff watches a lot of college tape. Why? Because the innovation in football comes at the lower levels offensively. It just always has. High school level and college level. Cliff's been a big part of that. being a part of Air Raid, Hal Mummy and everybody that followed. And Cliff, is looking for new things, to implement at the pro level. And Oregon's always one of those teams, going back to Chip Kelly and Cristobal and Dan Lanning, the whole 9 yards, about what Oregon's been about. And he saw and recognized Connor Lee Jr. At that point. A follow-up, by the way, to him bringing Cliff into the conversation of talking about the offensive line. He was asked by McAfee if he was worried about losing Cliff to a head coaching gig in this offseason. Here's what Adam Peters said.
He's a great coach and he's a great person. But I think what's cool about here is what the culture DQ has created, where people want to be here, people want to stay here. They're having fun working, they're having fun playing. So it makes it an easy decision. If it's not your perfect role that you want to move up to, whether it's head coach or something else, you have a great home here. And really that's how I felt when I was in San Francisco under John Lynch, where I really loved being there. But if there was the great opportunity came like it did with Washington, then I could take it. But if not, then I'm really, really happy here. And that's the culture that DQ's created within the staff here.
Yeah, Cliff Kingsbury, remember, is still getting paid for another 2 seasons as a head coach by the Arizona Cardinals. So I guess they're picking up the delta between what Washington's paying and what they would have been paying. So he's making head coach money because they had signed him to that contract before they ended up firing him. The jobs that Kingsbury could have had were not the most attractive in this, head coaching cycle. There was talk of him potentially being a candidate in New Orleans. New Orleans is in trouble, man, cap-wise, talent-wise, etc. There was, the opportunity potentially if Ben Johnson took somewhere else like New England. Chicago, I think, would have been interested. But Ben Johnson, I think, was the first choice there. Is it possible that that Vegas would have been interested? Maybe Dallas would have been interested, perhaps. But not the greatest of opportunities. The Chicago and New England opportunities in this offseason because of cap space, draft choices, and, by the way, of course, young talent at quarterback were the ideal, opportunities. And New England went Vrabel. They could have gone Vrabel, I think, last year, but Vrabel held out, did the 1-year holdout thing. And then Chicago went Ben Johnson from Detroit. Will there be better opportunities next year? Maybe. I would certainly Cliff, I do believe Cliff when he says, I'm happy right now. I love, just coaching offense. But a competitor like Cliff Kingsbury, at whatever age he is, early 40s, is going to take another swing at being a head coach. I don't think there's any doubt about that. All right, this was more from Adam Peters than I think we've gotten before on the acquisition in the offseason of Deebo Samuel.
Yeah, that was really cool. It was actually at the Combine. I was hanging out with Lynch at lunch, and we started talking about it. And, obviously there's a lot of talks that go into it. But knowing Deebo from when we drafted him to just the competitor that he is on the field, he's one of the best competitors on the field that I've ever seen in my life. And just he can put a team on his back and will you to win. So understanding what type of person he was, understanding that I worked with John, and he's going to be awesome to deal with, and then understanding our offense, which is getting the ball out of Jaden's hands quickly, and he's really good at that, and getting the ball in space and moving fast. That's going to present a lot of problems for defenses.
If he's healthy this year, mark me down if I'm not down for this already, Max. I think Deebo Samuel's going to have a massive season this year. Health is everything with him.
Contract year Deebo.
It's contract year Deebo, but the fit is an excellent one, and this will be the best quarterback he's played with by miles.
Absolutely.
And so, something that Peter said about Deebo Samuel has been a 49ers staple here during the John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan era. They look for relentless, high-energy competitors. I mean, that's what the 49ers have been about, right? With Deebo, with Kittle, with McCaffrey, with Trent, with Fred Warner, with Who am I forgetting? I mean, Debo after the catch is almost impossible to tackle. This is I just have a feeling that it's not going to take long. If he's healthy, that's the big if, because he's been injured a bunch. If he's healthy, it's not going to take long for us to realize that a 5th rounder for Debo Samuel was an absolute steal in terms of what he can be for this team with this OC and this quarterback. I think he's going to get used in so many different ways. He's going to take, he's going to take jet sweeps for 8 yards when it should have been 2 or 3. He's going to take zone read, option handoffs from JD 5 when the defense is playing quarterback run, and he's going to rip those for 10, 15 yards. He's going to catch a bubble, break 3 tackles, move the sticks. He's going to be very effective in the red zone in particular. Again, health, everything. But if he's healthy, it's going to be a massive addition to this offense. This was Adam Peters on who he listens to when making roster decisions.
Yeah, we're listening to everybody in the building, AJ, and the R&D team especially. It's really cool because it feels like there's 14 people in this one little office. It's like a big think tank, and they're all really smart and they're all really passionate. And like a cool story this year was when we drafted Trey Amos, who was like an R&D darling. We call him analytics, we call him R&D, but when we drafted him, you could hear like a roar from like 2 doors down because we drafted him and that he fell to us, which was really awesome. But all his metrics were incredible. But listening to them and being they're passionate about whether we're making a trade, whether we're making a draft pick, whether we're signing a free agent. But then there's also the coaching aspect and, of course, the scouting aspect and everybody working together in unison and collaborating. It's been really cool, and we're just getting started. I think we're going to get better and better as the years go on.
I'm really interested in who the stars in the organization are. He didn't mention anybody by name. There are a bunch of names that some of you guys are familiar with. It starts with Adam Peters and Lance Newmark, the assistant GM, who also had other opportunities after this season and decided to stay here. There's Brandon Sosna. I think he's different. He may be more involved in some of the game day stuff. But you've got, Scott Fitterer, who is a former GM. You've got Tim Gribble still on the staff. You've got Blackburn, who's actually the head of player personnel. You've got some really sharp scouts. You've got some really sharp guys in what they call their R&D department or analytics department. A couple of holdovers from the last regime who are super talented. There's somebody there's a couple of guys you would have to think, he goes to and really sees a future GM in. I'd love to know who those people are after like a guy like Newmark. All right, when we come back, a little bit more from Adam Peters. I'm actually interested in hearing him. He, sometimes it's just true. These pressers where it's all local, they ask the right questions. I'm not saying that they don't. But sometimes when you're on the Pat McAfee show, you get a little bit more out of the guests than you do when it's sort of the routine, pre-draft, post-draft, pre-rookie minicamp, presser, etc. What he said about Jalen Lane, you'll want to hear. That's coming up next.
All right, the arms race in the NFC Beast is heating up. The Steelers are sending George Pickens and a 6th-round pick to the Dallas Cowboys for a 2026 third and a 2027 6th-round pick. After signing a 3-year deal prior to the 2024 season, Gabe Davis has been released by the Jacksonville Jaguars. He had 20 receptions for 239 yards and 2 touchdowns in 10 games played. The Utah Hockey Club has officially decided upon a name following a 13-month process that included 850,000 ballots cast by fans in multiple rounds of voting. They will now be known as the Utah Mammoth. The Nats split the doubleheader with Cleveland. Game 1, they win 10-9. Jorge Lopez gets credited with the win. Kyle Finnegan gets the save. And Game 2, they lose 9-1. Brad Lord has 6 innings pitched, 3 hits, gave up 3 earned runs, and 4 strikeouts. The Caps drop one of the Canes 2-1 in overtime. Jacob Slavin with the overtime winner. And the Canes just outplayed the Caps and outshot them too, 33-14. Logan Thompson saved 31 of 33 shots, still at 2 in. Game 2 is tomorrow at 6:45 on 106.7 The Fan. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, and hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1, and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC Sports. And that's what's trending.
We are going to talk some NBA playoffs at noon with Jeff Zilgett from USA Today. I'll give you my thoughts, too, on the 2 games last night. The games the last few days and few nights have been insane, good and bad. More on that coming up at 12. But Adam Peters made a visit to the Pat McAfee show yesterday and actually, talked more for Adam Peters than we typically hear. There are a few more sound bites from Adam Peters that I want to play for you. This was him talking about selecting Jalen Lane in the 4th round, the wide receiver and punt returner out of Virginia Tech.
The cool thing about that one is on Saturdays before the draft, we get everybody in the room, all the scouts, the coordinators, R&D, and we do this thing. We actually took it from San Francisco. We call it the Commanders Caucus, which is a weird name, but so with Jalen, he was everybody gets a chance to vote on who is their favorite player that they want to draft on day 3. It's really day 3 is a scouts day, so it's awesome. Like everybody is involved. It's really cool. So we went around the room, and he had by far the most votes of anybody in the room. So for there, you have the buy-in from the R&D, you have the buy-in from the coaches who also voted, you have the buy-in from all of our scouts. And it's just a matter of, all right, well, hopefully he'll get to us because you really have buy-in from everybody in the building. So he was our number 1 returner in the draft. Larry Izzo was one of the people that voted for him. So it all worked out really well. He fell to us, which we were really excited about. And that was an easy pick. He's awesome. And he just had his birthday the other day. He's getting married this summer. He's incredible. So I can't wait. He's coming here Thursday, so I can't wait to meet him in person. Our coaches worked him out down there. Just really one of those ones where you really want to happen, and it did. And you feel really good about those.
There you go on Jalen Lane. Commanders Caucus does not ring well for many of us. Maybe we can refer to them as kind of Washington winners or something like that. But yeah, they have full Commanders talk inside that building where it's very popular, as Josh Harris told us a few months ago. I love hearing what I heard about Jalen Lane. Look, they don't have an obvious punt returner for starters. Let's hope that teams punt more against us than they did last year. But without Jamison Crowder, right now, Luke McCaffrey's a possibility. I forget who else is on the roster that's a possibility. I guess there's some guys deep down in the roster. The kid from UCLA that's still on the roster somewhere. Forgetting his name. Kaz Allen. But, lots of speed. This guy apparently is a grade A, culture guy. I think one of the things we thought of was another, playmaker offensively, and that's the one that they got in this offseason along with Deebo Samuel. In terms of additional playmakers in this offseason, it was Deebo, Jalen Lane, and I guess if you want to say bringing back Noah Brown and Ertz, that's where they are on that. All right, this was Adam Peters talking about the Howie Roseman video that we played for you yesterday, where Howie Roseman called Adam Peters during the draft, trying to trade up 3 spots from 32 to 29. They wanted to take the linebacker from Bama. Washington decided not to do it. You heard Howie Roseman say he wanted, an NFC East tax on the trade. And then you heard Howie Roseman respond with the pick of Josh Connerly Jr. when he said, good pick. Well, he was asked, Adam Peters was, by Pat McAfee and company, AJ Hawk, etc., on their show yesterday about that Howie Roseman draft video.
That was actually me busting his chops on TV for because he did that to me. And so that part they left out. But my first time talking to Howie, he was trying to trade me a player last offseason. It was like the first phone call we had. He's like, yeah, well, we can do this or that, but, because you're in division, there's a tax. You're going to have to pay a little more. And so that was just me throwing it back at him, and we were just joking around about it. But it's actually really fun. He's a great guy. He's a great GM, obviously, and he's awesome to deal with. We've done 2 deals already together and probably do more. But, it was just us back and forth having fun.
Yeah, the 2 deals being draft day last year when the Eagles traded up into the early portion of the second round and selected Cooper DeJean, and Washington ended up getting 2 picks in the middle of the third round, which were Ben Sinnott and Mikey Sanderstill, right? I think those were the 2 picks that they ended up picking. So they had 3 second-round picks, which included Johnny Newton early on in that second round. This was Adam Peters just talking about the NFC East and shaping the roster to compete within the division.
Yeah, I mean, you're always thinking about that. You're always thinking about how to beat every team in your division, every team in your conference, like every single second and every single day. Like that's what I stay up at night thinking about. But in terms of those trades, those are risks that you have to take. Now, do I think you can't be scared making those trades if you think they're going to, you're worried about the press clippings and all that. You're trying to make the best decision for your own team. And if you think that's the best decision for your own team to help win, then do it. But if it's if you're scared about it, you probably won't make the right decision.
And then Adam Peters actually complimented, I've not heard this yet, Max cut this up, complimented the DC media for positive coverage.
Yeah, they're great. First of all, they work extremely hard. They're diligent. They ask great questions. They're really respectful. They're awesome to work with. So I think, coming in and having Josh here and then myself and DQ coming in, I think they've been really, really respectful to us. And, it's been awesome to work with them. So I have no issues there. And it's been positive so far, and I know it's not always going to be that way, but they've been awesome.
What was the question? Did McAfee just ask him about DC media?
I really wish I knew, because I pulled this from G&D yesterday because they had also kind of touched on it a little bit, and Darius cut it up. But I'm going to need to go back and listen to that question because I'm actually very curious as to getting asked by Pat McAfee show about like DC sports media.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a conversation we've had for years. Look, big picture, when you are really good, it's going to be hard to be even constructively critical at times. I thought about this at some point a few weeks ago when Adam Peters said something, and I'm forgetting what it was, but during the course of the year, it was just so overwhelmingly obvious that this organization was different. The team was completely different, obviously driven more by Jaden Daniels than anything else, understood. But I was trying to think of at any point during the season, was I, my typical constructively critical of various things because there was so much to pick and nitpick at over the years. The only thing I could think about, and I'm sure somebody will remind me of something else, but I hated the opener in which at Tampa, when they were out of the game, they were still running Jaden Daniels on read option keepers into a defense that was really good in a game they could not win late in the fourth quarter. That was the only thing I remember saying, don't let Cliff Kingsbury do that. Can you imagine if he had gotten hurt? And he took a couple of big shots, remember, at the end of that first game? Mm-hmm. And that was, to me, the only massive head scratcher of the year. Somebody will remind me of something else, I'm sure. This was Adam Peters, and this is the last one we'll play, number 12, Max. I guess he was asked about the name. Here's what he said.
Do you like the name?
Love it.
I mean, you got it. Can't say it.
Yeah. No, honestly, I mean, we've embraced it. We've like our players have embraced it. We've embraced it. What a commander is. We've defined what a commander is. So I think everybody's all in on it. So we're pumped, and we're gonna keep going with it until they tell us not to.
Adam Peters on the name. Look, that answer, first time hearing it, goes hand in hand with the Josh Harris answer. That inside that building, they're all on board. I doubt that that's true, but they can't say it any other way, without being disingenuous. Because outside of that building, nobody's all in. No, there are some people that are all in, but the majority are not all in on the name. I think we all know that. All right, let's switch subjects. Good stuff, actually, from Adam Peters. Some really interesting stuff and more open in answering some of the questions than he typically has been. He's smart for starters. There's no doubt about that. He's also clearly likable. I'm assuming he's a good guy. I've heard good things about him from people that know him. And, they got Jaden Daniels. And when you get the quarterback right, it certainly makes everything else a lot easier to deal with, even when you make a couple of mistakes. All right, up next, we'll talk some NBA playoffs with Jeff Zilgett from USA Today. All right, talking some NBA playoffs. I think most of you who have been listening know that I am up every night watching all of it. I think it's been great so far. There have been some moments like the Celtics game the other night that aren't necessarily pleasant to watch, but two incredible games again last night. The Pacers have a 2-0 lead over Cleveland after taking the first two games in Cleveland. An incredible comeback last night. And then the Warriors, after losing Steph Curry in the first half, somehow beat the Minnesota Timberwolves in game one on the road, 99-88. There have been 5 second-round games so far, and the road team has won all 5 games. Joining me right now, a longtime NBA reporter, USA Today reporter, and writer Jeff Zillgitt. You can follow Jeff on X, on Twitter, at Jeff, Zillgitt, Instagram, J Zillgitt as well. So I actually want to start with Minnesota Golden State last night. How did Golden State win that game after losing Steph Curry?
A lot of it, Kevin, is defense. When you have Draymond Green, who finalist for Defensive Player of the Year, you added Jimmy Butler at the trade deadline. And from about that point, I'd say February 8th through the end of the regular season, and let's throw in the 7-game series against Houston, Golden State's had the best defense in the league. They held Houston to under 100 3 times in that series. They held Minnesota to under 90. It's just, Minnesota's offense has struggled a little bit in the playoffs. They scored at least 90 in every 82 regular season game. Now it's twice in the playoffs under 90. And yes, they missed Steph's scoring. And as Jimmy Butler said after the game, it's hard to play without that guy on the court. But they buckle up defensively, Kevin, and that's what they did. And, in today's NBA, there's going to be a lot of talk about the three-point shot, the way Boston missed 45 the other night. Well, when you start off 1 for 20 like Minnesota did on threes, it puts you in a hole that's hard to dig out of. And Golden State might not be the three-point shooting team of the Klay Thompson, Steph Curry house on days. However, they still had 18 of them last night, shot better than 40% from that distance. And Buddy Hield, he's a great shooter. Kevin, he's not always the most consistent, but when that shot's going down, he's carried them offensively the past 2 games. And that is how they won that game last night.
Well, and just incredible in Game 7 the other night in Houston with 33, and it was a phenomenal performance. You mentioned defense, and there's no doubt it was hellacious, as it was at times against Houston. They gave up a lot of offensive rebounds against Houston, a lot of second chance points, not as many last night. But my question to you is, because I didn't watch Golden State a lot during the regular season, have watched all of their playoff games, did they play this much zone during the regular season?
No, they didn't, Kevin. Now, Steve Kerr doesn't mind going to it. He's got a great coaching staff, but Jimmy Butler has allowed them to do some things defensively that maybe they weren't able to do prior to that. Off the top of my head, Kevin, I think they were right around 500 when that trade went down, 25 and 25. And Jimmy made a huge difference. All the little things that, you can find these stats on NBA.com as well, but the deflections, the blocks, the steals all went up. The opponent shooting percentage went down. That's what Jimmy Butler does. And I know Jimmy doesn't have that championship ring, and so that's missing from his resume. But there's no doubt with the experience he has, taking the Heat to 2 finals, playing deep into the playoffs with the Chicago Bulls, having some experience with Philadelphia and Minnesota, all that stuff pays off. And Jimmy wants a title. And when you get an engaged Jimmy Butler, as he is right now, you can see what improvements he can make. And you know what, Golden State also needed a little bit of a playmaker to help out Steph Curry offensively, and Jimmy can provide that. So he just eases the burden. And look, Draymond probably isn't going to hit 4 or 5 threes very often, but he did last night. But those are the kinds of performances you need, and that collective experience. And again, I know it's not the same Golden State team, but Draymond has played in 100 playoff games. Steph Curry, same kind of deal. And I know he's, left the game with the hamstring injury. And Steve Kerr's experience on the sideline, that helps out a team immensely at this stage of the game.
What was interesting, Jeff, is that I'm a massive Jimmy Butler fan this time of year. I mean, what he did in 23 in particular when, he had like 50 something against the Bucks. It was like something like 40 something and 50 something in back-to-back games, average like close to 39 or whatever. The game 7 in Boston when they won that game in the Eastern Conference, or the game 1 in Boston and game 7 in Boston, amazing. But last night was weird, Jimmy, in that he was incredible as a facilitator, rebounder, but he wasn't as aggressive looking for his shot. There was a game against Denver in the finals a few years ago where he kind of disappeared in taking shots, which was a weird Jimmy Butler game. And I've watched all of them. I love the player. I just love his IQ, the whole thing. But I thought it was interesting last night because when Steph went out, I'm like, Jimmy's going to have to get 35 for them to hang on to the lead that they have right now and for them to win this game. And he didn't. He was not aggressive as a scorer. I found that interesting. What did you think?
So, Kevin, you bring up a couple things, and I'm playing this through, and I wonder if, Jimmy looks at that situation and says, okay, we don't have Steph. It's going to be really difficult for us to win. How much energy am I going to expend on the offensive end? And can we get it done potentially with someone else? They were playing well when Steph left the game.
Yeah, they were.
So I think that maybe afforded Jimmy a little bit of leeway offensively. And then, again, Buddy Hield did not have a great first half. He really picked it up in the second half. And I wonder, you hear players all the time, they read the game, they let the game come to them, they don't make predetermined decisions on how they're going to play. And I'm wondering if that was just the case last night. But your overall point is correct. There's these weird games where Jimmy doesn't have that same aggressiveness. And I just wonder if last night he was picking his spots and thought, okay, we don't have Steph. If we end up losing, they're going to need me for game 2. And then the way the game unfolded, they get the win. They don't know Steph's status until the MRI results come in. And then you may see a more aggressive Jimmy in game 2, depending on Steph's availability.
No, that answer makes sense to me because we've certainly seen him take over offensively when he feels he has to. Just sticking with last night's game, because I found it fascinating from a number of standpoints. Number one, the Butler angle. Number two, what we just we'll get to the Steph injury. But Steve Kerr went to places on his bench last night. In a game in which they had a lead, they had a comfortable lead throughout, but I always felt like Minnesota had a run in them that was going to make this game much tighter, and they got it to 9, they got it to 7, I think, at one point. He went to Pat Spencer for like double-digit minutes in the game last night. He really, sometimes the things he does, and they just seem to pay off more often than not. But I thought it was wild the way he went to the deep, throws of his bench last night.
Well, Kevin, you hit on a couple things, but also you spent a lot of time with Steve this summer, both at the USA Olympic camp in Las Vegas, but then in the Olympics in Paris as well. And I'm just fascinated by a lot of his decision making, what goes into it. He's very collaborative. He talks to his staff all the time, whether it's the Olympics or Golden State. And so he's making decisions on the fly. I also noticed in game 7 against Houston, same kind of deal. Jonathan Kuminga had been getting limited minutes and probably a little bit disgruntled about that. But he went to him early just to give his starters some rest because he knows he's playing them 40 minutes a game. You mentioned the Pat Spencer, the Quentin Post, Kevon Looney got some minutes both in game 7 and in game 1. And I think he's just trying to find some spots to give guys a little bit of a breather, knowing that Jimmy's going to get 40. He's probably going to have to do that with Draymond, Buddy Hield close to that. And so that's his coaching decision. And Kevin, I'm a big proponent of depth throughout the regular season. You're going to need some guys to help you out on one of those, lonely February nights. But we see the benches shrink in the playoffs, and all these teams I thought who had great benches are now all of a sudden just playing 7, 8 guys. And then you see, well, maybe they're not as deep as I thought. And then, Steve's just trying to buy a little bit of time, making wise substitutions, maybe before he knows a TV timeout is coming, right before a free throw, end of quarter situation. and just to give his starters a little bit extra rest so they have something left in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to watch him too. A lot of casual fans that start to tune in this time of year, they aren't necessarily huge Draymond Green fans because of the antics, because of the emotions that get to him. He's had back-to-back unbelievable games. Game 7 against Houston, Game 1 last night. By the way, knocking down threes. Like, I think he was 4 for 9 last night from behind the arc. Hit a bunch of them early. He was on fire early on. But, from your standpoint, I've been a massive fan of just his overall basketball IQ, and I think he's a borderline Hall of Famer. I don't know what you think, but I want to hear it.
No, he is. And so you mentioned, and Kevin, the IQ. And that collective IQ, when you add in Steph, we'll get to that, but with Jimmy, with Steve Kerr, okay? Yeah. And Draymond might be one of the smartest defensive players the game has seen in a couple of decades or, the past 30 seasons. And so that adds a lot to it. You get him out there, and I know I've talked a lot about Jimmy's defense. Draymond anchors it. And the other thing, Kevin, with the 2 games we just saw, he was also had to control those emotions because he was playing 2 guys he doesn't like, Dylan Brooks and Rudy Gobert.
Yeah.
Okay. And so they know that they can't afford to have Draymond on the bench with a flagrant foul 2 or in the locker room getting technicals, all those things. And he came through for them. And that's the Draymond they're going to need, whether Steph's on the court or not. They're not getting to the finals if Draymond's not playing the way he is, especially defensively, and then a little bit of his offense. He's just vital to what they do. It's the reason they felt that they still have a championship window. Steph, obviously, still all NBA caliber. But with Draymond and Steph even getting a little bit older, it's the reason they went out and got Jimmy, because they think with those 3 they can still get back to the finals.
It's fun to watch their team for sure, because I think they're different than a lot of teams. They don't rely on ISO. 5 people are involved offensively, usually on a significant number of possessions. Their defense, both especially that it looks like a 1-3-1 that they start in, has given back-to-back teams trouble. They're just super high IQ. But bottom line is, no Steph Curry means I don't think they can beat Minnesota. Talk about how long you think he's out with this hamstring injury and whether or not you think they can survive without him.
Kevin, I'm with you. We're going to be really tough to survive without him if it's an extended absence. They're going to do everything they can. You heard a little bit of this on the broadcast last night, and it makes some sense. If it's not sidelining him for the rest of the series and they believe he can get him back, it makes sense to sit him out game 2. I realize they would love to go back to San Francisco up 2-0, but 1-1, it came here, got what they needed, at least 1. That gives him a couple extra days rest if they're able to sit him, get him treatment, get him some rest, and we'll see what happens. I don't know the severity of that hamstring injury just yet. Kevin, most of these NBA arenas do not have an MRI machine. All they're getting is a quick X-ray looking for some structural damage, and the MRI will give you a more clear picture of how severe it is. If it's just a strain, I think they can work that and get him in shape to play some games. And I know Steph will want to be out there. If it's more severe than that, if there's a partial tear, a tear, that's when it's going to become a little bit more problematic for him getting back this series. But overall, even if they were to get past Minnesota without Steph and he couldn't play the following series, that's going to be even more difficult, whether it's Denver or Oklahoma City.
Yeah. All right, let's stay in the West. Jeff Zilgett from USA Today joining us. I mean, the game 1 the other night, I never thought for a moment that Denver could win that game. It was fluctuating between, 14 and, occasionally 5 or 6 points. And then the Nuggets came down the stretch. I criticized the strategy yesterday of fouling, not necessarily fouling up 3, but how quickly they fouled. They fouled in the back court on one of those fouls up 3. And then ultimately Holmgren missed the 2 free throws and Aaron Gordon knocked down the 3 to pull out a miracle comeback and a win for Denver in game 1. I watched the post game and they didn't seem to think that they had made a mistake in fouling the way they fouled. What did you think?
I thought they did. And I know Mark Daigneault, the coach, he's going to defend it at Oklahoma City. They've played that way before. but you hit on it, Kevin. They started it too early, and they just left too much time on the clock and didn't make Denver work for their points. Those two fouls that we're talking about that happened, I think, like at 12.9 or 10.7 seconds, right around that. Those are 4 points for Denver, Kevin, with barely 2 seconds coming off the clock. And the free throw right there with the 3-point shot is the most efficient shot that people take when you talk about how many points per possession that gives you. And then it keeps Denver close with it. And then when someone misses the 2 free throws like that, then all of a sudden, Denver's got time to get off a pretty good look the way that unfolded with Westbrook getting out in open court, finding Gordon on the perimeter. And so I think they were wrong. I know they've used this strategy and that's their philosophy, but I think you make Denver take a few more seconds off the clock on each possession, and then it makes it a little bit more difficult on that final shot. Maybe they don't even get one off at that point. And so it was just a little too early is the bottom line. And I think it would come to recognize that in that moment. I understand why the OKC coach is going to defend it. I think when he has a discussion with his front office, the coaching staff, they'll realize that, it was just a little too early to start that game.
All right. Jokic is just, doing Jokic things, 42 and 22 in game one. The guy that I am shocked about his playoff performance so far, because I thought he was done. He was horrific with the Clippers last year. Russell Westbrook he's been resurrected as a shooter in this postseason. Who saw that coming? He's knocking down all of these threes. I mean, there was a pretty good chance the last few years he was going to break backboard glass before he made a shot. What has happened with Westbrook and his shooting in particular here in the postseason?
I can't explain that portion of it. Other than that, I think he has found a nice spot in the rotation, and he's earned or gained the confidence of Nikola Jokic. Yeah. And I think that's helping him out a ton, the way he's playing with that kind of confidence. Look, we've seen Russell, and you saw him here for a little bit in D.C., Kevin. He's not always had the greatest shot, but he could make shots. I don't think, he's sort of like in the 43-ish% shooter. But knocking down those shots and playing with the confidence that he does has been a bit of a surprise. I wasn't sure I liked the signing in the offseason, but I know Denver had to do something because they were losing guys in free agency, Contavious Caldwell-Pope, some of those guys from the championship team from just 2 years ago, including Bruce Brown, no longer there. And so they needed a little bit more. And I talk about that depth, Denver, another team, not really going much deeper than 7 guys. But you talk about Draymond, borderline Hall of Fame. Well, Russ is going into the Hall of Fame.
Sure.
Okay. And so you have that on your side. And I just think the confidence of which with Denver plays, when Joker has that belief in you, it just changes his style right now. And again, that was a great play too, Kevin. Instead of going to the rim, finding Aaron Gordon on the wing right there for the game winner. And so it's sort of, as you pointed out, a really enjoyable story if you're a Nuggets fan.
Yeah, but I think you nailed it. That trade doesn't happen unless Jokic is in favor of it. And they've had a very high efficiency number on pick and roll, the two of them together all season long. So Denver legitimately stole game one, which, that more fits the description of stealing a game one. Who wins this series? I think the Oklahoma City is still, a solid favorite at like minus 300. What do you think happens?
I still like Oklahoma City. The 68 wins, what they're able to do offensively and defensively throughout the series, I think will ultimately get them the victory. I think they're the better team. But again, that championship experience that Denver has, I know I mentioned guys leaving, but Aaron Gordon, we know Joker, Jamal Murray, they were all on that championship team. Chris Porter Jr., and he struggled a little bit. I think he's got a bad shoulder. Christian Brown was on that championship team, maybe not as minutes then as he's getting now. David Adelman, I wrote the other night, I think Denver should give him the job. He wins a game 7. He gets them this game one victory. He's got the coaching pedigree with his dad, Rick Adelman, who's in the Hall of Fame. I think going with some of these guys who might not be the biggest name, pays dividends. I mean, who knew Mark Daigneault from Oklahoma City before this? I think there's a ton of Ime Udoka, spent a lot of time as an assistant for Popovich, then gets his chance in Boston. That sort of faltered for off the court reasons. But what he did with Houston, and I think David Adelman has the coaching chops. And if he also has the respect of Nikola Jokic, that could go a long way in giving him that job. But I thought that Adelman's been fantastic in figuring out how to, you mentioned the word, steal some victories here in these series. And, I think he did in game one. I just think ultimately, I think Shea Gilgeous needs to be a little bit better for Oklahoma City. He was okay. And I don't want this to be an indictment on who people voted for MVP, whoever wins this series. But I do think Shea needs to play a little bit better for them to win this series as well.
Let me just ask you one other Western Conference question, because I'm a massive Kawhi guy, and I was hoping that the Clippers could knock off the Nuggets. But I knew that going into it, James Harden's going to be the problem more than anything else. Have we come to the conclusion, for those that haven't, that you can't win this time of year if James Harden's one of your top two players?
It's a great question, Kevin. I mean, I think he could be maybe a number two in a different situation. I know Kawhi has number one talent, but I'm just trying to figure out a scenario in which I could see James Harden being the number two guy on a team. I just wonder if Kawhi because I love his game too, if he's just not as dominant offensively as you need him to be on a regular basis, for James to be the number two on that kind of team. Maybe if James is the number two and in Boston, okay, if you switch out Jaylen Brown for James Harden, maybe that's where he could be the number two guy. But being the number one or number two on a team that gets to the conference finals or beyond is proving very difficult for James Harden. And I'm with you, Kevin. The way the Clippers played at the end of the regular season, I thought they had a really good shot to even get to the conference finals. And yet, when you get into these 7-game series and you start to figure out not only a team's weakness, but a guy's weakness, take it away. I thought really Denver, did a fantastic job doing that. And James's history there, I think Denver really focused on some of the things that he can't do in the postseason, like take over a game. And they limited what he was able to do. And we see that that's the problem that the Clippers have, with James being either number one or number two.
I think that, and I think this story's been written on him as a postseason player. He's a Hall of Fame regular season player, there's no doubt. But there seems to me, and I think I said this on the show yesterday, there seems to be either the inability to understand that playoff basketball is different and the level. Yeah. Look, I blame Ty Lue for some of this. The amount of ISO ball with a guy that dribbles the life out of it for 22 of the 24 seconds and then tries to make a play is just not winning basketball this time of year. So it's either he isn't bright enough to figure out that the game changes in the postseason or that he doesn't care. And I settled on the latter. I just don't think he cares.
Yeah, because to the point about being smart, Kevin, you don't play those regular season games and do what he does. He compiles some assists, Kevin. So he obviously sees the game in certain ways, and it might be that it doesn't care or is just too stubborn to look around and say, hey, this style doesn't get the job done at this point of the year. But I'm going to keep doing it anyway because that's what I do during the regular season. And that could be the larger issue as well, a combination of stubbornness and I don't care, this is the way I do it. And I don't know who's going to sit him down at this point in his career and change his mind. Yeah. It's not like he's a young guy who's figuring it out. You can go to him like you can, let's just use Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and say, hey, you haven't been to the conference finals. Look around, see what guys are doing. You can get a guy to play differently. That's not happening with James Harden at this point.
All right, you've been generous with your time. Jeff Zilgett from USA Today joining us. I'll just finish up with this. Will Boston take 63s tonight against the Knicks and miss 45?
Kevin, I'm a huge proponent of the three-point shot philosophically. I understand its importance, and I'm getting ready to write a story, and I'll give a little bit of away of it. I think the three-point revolution has met its enemy, and it's the anti-three-point zealots that are out there. I'm not one of those, and I realize that that's Joe Mazzulla's style. I just thought at the end of that game that Boston settled for way too many of them. I don't mind them shooting. They were almost at 50 a game during the regular season. They're going to shoot them. Well, let's get beyond that. I just thought they were a little bit lazy about it. They still may take 45 of them tonight, Kevin, and I think that will be enough to get the job done. They just need to be smarter about when and where they take them.
Yeah. Shooters never think the next one isn't going in. And I think that the fact that they lost a game in overtime, missing 45 threes, is almost going to embolden them to say, yeah, that's not going to happen again. Thanks, Jeff, for doing this. Really appreciate it. Maybe we can catch up before the finals.
Sounds good, Kevin. Appreciate the conversation.
Jeff Zilgett from USA Today, been with USA Today for a long time, covering the NBA in recent years. Something Tim Legler said, wait till you hear this, about the way Boston played the other night. We've got that next. Chris Russell will jump on with us at the end of the show to talk Caps and Carolina. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, and the team980.com. They really have been. I mean, we had an incredible weekend with a Game 7 on Saturday night. Wasn't a great Game 7. Then the Warriors going on the road and winning Game 7 in Houston on Sunday night. Monday night, we had the Knicks-Celtics crazy 45 missed threes overtime game. Knicks were down 20 and came back and won that game. The Nuggets stole one from the Thunder with 2 seconds to go. Last night, we had the Pacers down 7 in the last 40 seconds, come back on a Halliburton 3 off a missed free throw to beat the Cavs to take a 2-0 lead. And then the Warriors, even after losing Steph Curry to a hamstring injury, beat the T-Wolves 99-88. There has not been a home team to win a game in the first 5 opportunities in this second round. Tim Legler, one of my favorites, and we'll get Tim on the show. He's calling a lot of these games, but texting back and forth with him during some of these games. And yesterday on ESPN, he went off on Boston the other night, having a big lead, settling for threes, and missing the most threes in NBA playoff history, 45 of them. This is what Legler said about it.
Listen, man, what the Boston Celtics did last night was an insult to basketball, in my opinion, man. That's an abomination. An abomination offensively to play the way they played. And look, if people are going to sit there, well, that's how they play all the time, man. Live by the 3, die by the 3. What are you talking about? Watch the game. I don't care how many they listed. First of all, I know this for a fact because I've dived into this. The way the league or statisticians or people at the game that are doing the stats label contested, uncontested shots, I've got a massive disagreement about. I've already looked at it in Second Spectrum because you pull up information and you're like, wait a second, that's not an uncontested shot, whatever. So there's a big number of uncontested shots, and that's what the Celtics contingent and people that love the Celtics or that defend the Celtics are going to say today. Well, they're all uncontested threes. My ass. I watched. I wrote them all down. They were not. Here's the thing too. There's a difference between what you might even think is an uncontested shot and a rushed shot. You can still have an uncontested shot that's rushed.
Love that last point. Legler is the sharpest basketball mind in terms of analysts on TV. He just is. And one of the reasons is he's still coaching. He's still involved in the sport, coaching high-level AAU teams. But anyway, that last point, that an uncontested shot, statistically, advanced statistic, sort of measuring a shot is uncontested because it's not necessarily guarded, but it's rushed because you do have a closeout coming, or you've got a fear of a closeout coming. That's almost equivalent to a contested shot when you're rushing shots. I talked about this yesterday. I thought it was the dumbest level of basketball in the second half and down the stretch, and almost too arrogant that I've ever witnessed. It's not going to stop. It is the way they play. They're going to shoot 45 to 50 of these things, and they knock down a lot higher percentage than 25%, and they almost won the game missing 45 threes. So that'll embolden them more than anything else. I hate it, though. And I love NBA playoff basketball, but I hate all of the threes. I hate ISO. I hate two-man exclusively. And what the Celtics do on every possession is they seek out the matchup they want, who they want Jason Tatum to go one-on-one with, who they want Jaylen Brown to go one-on-one with, who they want Derek White to go one-on-one with. And you end up with two-man basketball, best case, and usually resulting in a launched three or a play to go by somebody and then kick back out for an open three. I don't love it. It's not my favorite style of basketball, but they won a title playing that way last year. They're also a pretty good defensive team, and they certainly can beat the Knicks playing this way. I mean, they're not going to miss 45 threes, contested or uncontested, but I agree with Tim. I thought it was nauseating to watch. And by the way, the Knicks play a lot of that too. There's a lot of ISO with Jalen Brunson, but he just knocked down some truly tough contested shots down the stretch. He's a special shot maker. He is. There are a lot of them in the league. Doesn't make watching that style of play attractive. Be interesting to see what happens tonight. Would not be surprised if the Celtics win big tonight. They are a 10.5-point favorite in game 2. In fact, my recommendation to keep watching NBA playoffs tonight, maybe take a night off, because I see the Thunder and the Celtics winning by big margins tonight in game 2 to even up their series at a game apiece. All right, when we come back, Chris Russell will jump on. Chris is big hockey guy and was watching last night. We'll get his thoughts on what he thought of the game 1 overtime loss to Carolina at Capital One Arena. We'll do that next. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, the team980.com. We're free and live on the Odyssey app. We're also on the Team 980 YouTube page, streaming the show daily. When you get there, like it and subscribe to it.
All right. The NFC arms race continues to heat up in the NFC Beast. The Steelers are sending George Pickens and a 6th-round pick to the Dallas Cowboys for a 2026 third and a 2027 6th-round pick. After signing a 3-year deal prior to the 2024 season, Gabe Davis has been released by the Jaguars. He had 20 receptions, 239 yards, and 2 touchdowns in 10 games played in 2024. The Utah Hockey Club has officially decided upon a name following a 13-month process that included 850,000 ballots casted by fans in multiple rounds of voting. They will now be known as the Utah Mammoth. The Nats split their doubleheader yesterday with the Cleveland Guardians. Game 1, they win 10-9. Jorge Lopez credited with the win. Kyle Finnegan gets the save. And in Game 2, they lose 9-1. Brad Lord, 6 innings pitched, 3 hits, 3 earned runs, and 4 strikeouts. The Caps drop one of the Canes in overtime 2-1. Jacob Slavin hits the overtime winner. The Canes just outplayed the Caps, outshot them too, 33-14. Game 2 will be tomorrow at 6:45 on 106.7 The Fan. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, and hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1, and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that's what's trending.
did they just out execute you guys tonight as far as breakouts and doing all the little things that go into winning a game?
Vogues, if we sat here and went through the whole game from breakout to getting through the neutral zone to forecheck to wall play, we could. It wasn't good, and that's the bottom line. Our entire game was not good, and we'll, like I said, we'll regroup and we'll get ready for game 2.
Spencer Carberry last night after the Caps lose game 1 to Carolina, 2-1 in overtime. Joining us right now, kind to do it before his show at 1:00, where I'm sure he will have a lot of thoughts on last night's game, is Chris Russell. So, I mean, you know me, I don't know a lot about hockey, but I like it this time of year. And I open the show by saying, you don't really have to know hockey to know a one-sided beatdown and that the score was misleading like last night's game. Do you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely, because Carolina completely dominated, as Spencer Carberry said, and I was at that press conference, and he went for that was one of the few answers that he actually gave with any kind of detail, and the other one, I think, was to mine about the physical component not being there and how badly Carolina out-hit and out-physicaled Washington, but I'm sure we'll touch on that in a sec, but that could have easily been 3-1, 4-1 at the end of regulation, where you don't even need the game-winning goal because it's not going to overtime. And this is with a 1-0 lead on the Protas goal. This is with surviving a very shaky first period and playing better in the second period, but even as that period went on, when I thought they would really feed off of the momentum, they just didn't have it, Kev. I mean, again, they should have lost this game 3-1, 4-1 in regulation. Thompson saved them. And, they ultimately lost it on a not good clear. Surprise. Shocker. And ultimately a long distance shot that kind of trickles through. I thought it got deflected live, but I guess it didn't.
It didn't.
Was
that a bad goal that he let in?
It's not a great goal. I don't know if I want to call it a bad goal, but it's not a great goal by any stretch.
I have a specific question about last night. And Emily Kaplan was on with us earlier in the show. For those of you that missed it, she's really good. You can find it in the first hour of the show on the team980.com or by downloading the Odyssey app. But the 94-34 shot attempt disparity, which is, incredible. Now, she said that's always expected. It's the way Carolina plays. They're analytics driven. They're about shot attempts, and they think ultimately that will lead to more goals offensively. My question to you, as somebody who knows hockey, is do you take chances by being that aggressive? Can part of the Caps strategy be we're okay with the ice tilted that much because the counter attack, the counter punch, we're going to end up with what Ryan Leonard ended up with last night. We're going to end up with a couple of 2-on-1s and 3-on-2s. And the high quality chances they got weren't, overwhelming. Is it okay for that disparity to continue in hopes of scoring on the counter?
Well, yes and no. And I'll straddle the fence because yes, if you can actually get those opportunities and finish them. No, if you're getting such limited opportunities, limited shots on goal, limited 2-on-1, 3-on-2s, limited sustained puck possession, time in the offensive zone to cycle through, the forecheck's not working, so on and so forth. Because you're dealing, I guess the best way I put it is you're constantly flirting with danger. I used to talk with Barry Trotz about this, and I disagreed with Barry Trotz about this, I should say, and he was right, I guess, and I was wrong. And that is like that the Capitals championship team and the Capitals teams leading up to that would never pepper the goaltender and the offensive zone quite like you see out of a team like Carolina, right? And my argument was, and I think this would be Rod Brindamore's argument, is you take your chances and you get knockdowns, deflections, weird puck bounces, weird caroms, so on. You just never know. And Barry's point was always quality over quantity. And I do get that, but you can't play a game when you're this suspect, in my opinion, on the back end, right? Don't forget, you don't have Martin Faravari. You have Alex Alexiev, and he was involved in the turnover on the game-tying goal. I'm not saying it was his fault, but he was involved in that. You can't play this much with the tilted ice and the back end and so on and so forth and expect to get away with it, especially when you're not finishing on the other end or you're not getting any sustained counteraction on the other end.
All right, so best of sevens in all sports, it's about, okay, one game's in the books. Now it's about adjustments. And Spencer Carberry, from what I know, from what people have told me, is considered to be a high-level kind of X's and O's coach. So what are the adjustments that he has to make?
In my opinion, they have to, because they're not carrying the puck through, or at least last night, because they're not carrying the puck through the neutral zone and setting up shop and setting up camp and getting that good puck cycle and all the hockey terms. I think you're going to have to play more of a dump and chase forecheck your ass off in the corners and use that physicality that they absolutely have the edge on, Kev, to their advantage in the corners to dig pucks out.
The edge isn't as large as it was against Montreal in terms of the size and physicality.
That's fair, but people in Carolina, they know that Carolina's in a little bit of trouble if Washington does what they were able to do at times in the regular season matchups, including the last matchup in the second period of that game in mid-April, where Washington dominated, and it started with Ovechkin as a heat-seeking missile. And I thought a couple of times last night, Ovechkin had a couple of hits in one sequence.
Yeah.
Tom Wilson had a couple of hits inside the first 3.5 minutes. Ryan Leonard had a big hit. Pierre-Luc Dubois had a hit. But I never saw it like a sustained rolling like you did against Montreal. And part of that is because Carolina with the puck, you're chasing them, and they've got speed, and they've got skill, and they've got transition. So they're going to have to find a way to use that physicality to wear them down over the series. So the only way I can think of course, be better when they have the puck. Yes, we all understand that. But the only way I can think of to use your physicality to your advantage, again, especially if you're struggling to get the puck through the neutral zone and to set up shop in the offensive zone, and you're struggling to get sustained shots and chances, is by digging by dumping the puck in and having an aggressive forecheck in the corners and behind the net, so that hopefully you get an opportunity to center one for Dylan Strome or Tom Wilson or Alex, obviously in the office, or just back to the point for Carlson or Jacob Chikrin, right, who, by the way, I didn't think Jacob Chikrin played a very good game last night. I thought he was really poor late in regulation, early in overtime, and it almost cost them.
So for the wear and tear of a long series to work ultimately in the Caps' favor, you got to get to a long series.
Yeah. So
last night they were dominated, almost won a game, and it would have been a stealing of a game had they won that game last night, 1-0, or had gotten a fluke bounce on one opportunity in overtime. Are you concerned after watching what we watched last night that this doesn't get to a long series?
Yeah. I mean, how could you not be? Because even though the positive angle is, hey, they played as bad as they can play, and they could have won if it was a doubt. I can't remember.
Leonard had a breakaway.
Well, Leonard had the breakaway with 5.5 minutes left to go. But wasn't it Dowd in overtime, I think, on the feed? I want to say it was Dowd.
One chance, but the puck was dominated by Carolina in the OT.
And that's the problem, is when you look at the sustained control and puck possession and domination, and you realize that this was the one kind of bugaboo about the Capitals. Even when things were going well, Spencer Carberry was not happy about their puck control and their puck possession. Never mind the last month of the regular season. And even at times in Montreal, like, people forget, okay, they beat Montreal 4-1. They were awful in the third period until games 4 and 5. Right. And a lot of what we saw sustained over 3 periods in overtime last night was reserved for Montreal in the third period, Kev. But the difference is Carolina's so much better, deeper, faster, tougher, meaner, skilled, all of that stuff. And they roll 4 lines. Montreal rolled One line. So this is a big-time problem. Yes, I think they'll make some counters. Yes, I think they'll be better tomorrow night. There's no way I don't think they can be as bad. I know they're not as bad as they showed last night. Do I think they're going to win? Listen, they're going to have to play a lot better. I hope. But if you go down 0-2 to Carolina, even though they made a living of that in the 2018 Cup playoff run, that's a whole different beast down there.
So are you going to open the show with the series is over?
No.
Okay.
I'm going to say I am very concerned about this series, which I was to begin with, but I did pick the Caps in 7. However, I did pick the Carolina Hurricanes to win last night. I did not think it would be that much of a dominant effort, but I did pick Carolina to win last night.
Well, the good news is we don't have to wait a week for the next game like we did at the end of the Montreal series. That's absurd, by the way. That doesn't make any sense.
Well, you know, the NHL is trying to keep everybody, in line, and every league does it a little bit differently.
They're
NBA
spreading it out.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Game 2 tomorrow night. You're up next. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Kev. Appreciate you.
Chris Russell, everybody. Thanks to Chris. Thanks to Emily Kaplan, who joined us earlier in the show. Jeff Zilgett from USA Today to talk some NBA hoops. And Max did a great job today. Back tomorrow, everybody. Chris is next.